Trauma is the phenomena of a larger pattern of energy colliding, violating, engaging with our identity, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, in such a way that the survival of the pattern is threatened. Meaning, if our pattern of thinking is like this, and our pattern of feeling is like this, and an energy collides with this pattern in such a way that the pattern shatters, the pattern is broken and cannot be recovered. That's trauma. The belief that the pattern will be broken, the awareness that it could be broken, is a traumatic awareness. The I is that which attaches to, which identifies with a pattern that is familiar, that we have seen happen before and that feels safe because the pattern has repeated itself over and over again and we're still here. When that is threatened by an object larger than our identity, we feel the fear of trauma. When that collides and the pattern breaks and we cannot hold on to it, it is a traumatic event. Now, the traumatic event of a shattered pattern with no ability to hold on to the coherence of what was becomes PTSD when, in the chaos and the terror of the unknown induced by the traumatic event, our need for certainty, our need for solidity, our need for a new identity is so great that we instinctively claw around us for anything that seems stable and coherent. And often the thing that feels most stable and coherent right after a traumatic event is the traumatic memory. The pattern of the collision between the larger object and the smaller object, of the bowling ball colliding with the pinball, the memory, which is a recalled pattern, a pattern that is reconstituted in the brain. We were heading this way as a pinball, and the bowling ball collided. We went flying. We lost the pattern. We lost the coherence. And the bowling ball continued as a larger mass of energy. And we were shattered. Our trajectory was broken. Our pattern was broken. And we found ourselves out in the unknown, in the terror of the unknown, in the terror of chaos, and looking around us for something stable to hang on to. We grasped the memory, biological memory, mental memory, visual memory of the traumatic event itself. And this becomes locked in to the I that is looking for something to attach to as the new identity, as the new pattern. And the identity is formed in the remembering, in the re-looping of the traumatic event itself, which happens over and over and over with crystalline clarity. It's a stable pattern. In other words, the pattern before the collision with a larger object is replaced by the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is the traumatic event itself. And the I, desperately searching for a pattern, now clings to the memory of the trauma with the desperation of a drowning human in high water, grabbing the rusty nails, the splintered shards of wood of the ship that just went down. It's painful to grab and be punctured by those splinters, but it feels like something stable, something solid. After all, if you have just been consumed by a larger pattern of energy that has shattered the old pattern, the old identity that I identified who we were, has got to be more solid than the old because it shattered us. There's a lot of interesting psychology about helpless children who identify with their abuser, with women who identify with the people hurting them. With helpless victims who come to idealize their abuser based on superior strength. They won the collision. And in the paradigm of might makes right, the bowling ball must be right, even if it's heading in the wrong direction, even if it's leading to violation, even if it's sociopathic, because it survived the collision and we did not. PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, is the syndrome within which the identity of the past is so broken and so unstable that we cannot go back to it. And that the effort to find a new identity feels so frightening in its vulnerability that we cannot muster the courage to face another violation. And so what we cling to is the violation itself, is the traumatic event. And in doing so, gain certainty, because few things are as big, are as stable, are as intense as the worst moments of pain and fear and helplessness. And by reliving them, by creating a new pattern of the trauma, I think about it, 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 I think about it. It's not going anywhere. It seems stable. When I think about this other thing out there, this unknown, and then I think about the collision, it's like that could fall away too. I could lose that. But I'm never going to lose the traumatic incident. It's indelibly imprinted with high energy, with high emotional intensity on my body. I can hold that pattern. I can remember the violation. I can find myself. I can find an I attached to that event. I am the one who experienced this. And I can remember it and remember it and remember it. And now I've got certainty. In a chaotic and overwhelming world, I've got certainty. So we move from the original identity to the traumatized identity. The original identity collapsed. The traumatized identity now emerges. And then the trauma induces a fear of losing identity, because that's what trauma does. And the fear of losing identity reinforces the clinging to the trauma, because that is an available pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that seems solid, that seems like it's familiar. We don't want to let go and find ourselves in the void again, in the chaos again. And so this is the crisis and the phenomena of PTSD. And the remedy, the quest and the question for those around someone with PTSD and the person who is in PTSD, who has identified, attached themselves primarily to the pattern of the traumatic event as a relived memory, as the defining pattern. The quest, initiated by the question, is this: can I create a new identity, a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is strong enough, that is certain enough, that is stable enough to survive the traumatic event that crushed the last identity, that broke me? Because if I cannot, if the solution is to let go of the traumatic identity, piece together some fragments of the old identity, and just wait helplessly for the next traumatic event to shatter that identity, the ego will not accept it. Because the ego experiences death when it has no pattern. The ego fears losing its pattern and its control over its pattern more than it fears anything else. Our ego would rather be in severe pain than to feel helpless, not know who it is, and feel unable to stop the next shattering. Now, the reason that the traumatic event in excruciating pain and shame and disorientation is so safe as a source of stability is that if nicer and blander things happen in the reality, they don't change the violation pattern. If someone says, "Hey, how are you?" that doesn't threaten the intense identity of one's worst trauma. It's just a passing thing. You can go right back to the traumatic memory that is as vivid and intense as ever. But if another trauma comes along, it will have to be stronger and more intense than the worst trauma before, or it's not going to touch the pattern. You will stay remembering the worst trauma, which was the most intense, which has the most stable and reliable pattern. Because that's the goal. That's life for the ego. It's not to feel happy. It's to feel a sense of agency. I am the one who thinks and feels and speaks and does and is like this. The first goal in the hierarchy of ego development is stability and agency. The secondary goal is well-being. So first I need to have an identity. And if I can evolve the identity from a miserable identity to a more sustainably happy identity. The key is sustainability, which is certainty. If I knew for sure I could leave the job that I hate and start a job that I love, I would do it in a heartbeat. If I knew for sure I could leave the partner that I'm disgusted with and can't stand looking at, if I knew for sure that I could leave them for somebody that brought out the best in me, and they wouldn't leave me, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I don't know for sure. And so I cling to the pattern. In the case of PTSD, the traumatic event, the worst trauma. And I define myself by the pattern of the trauma, the physiology of the trauma. And in doing so, often invite re-traumatization because that is consistent with the pattern I am identifying with. And if I'm identifying as a victim, then I'm projecting abuser. And people who have a weak pattern of identity will adopt and adapt the strongest projection around them. Meaning, if I don't have a strong sense of who I am, and somebody looks at me like a villain and treats me like a villain, and invites me to behave like a villain, and rewards me with attention for being a villain, and ignores me when I'm nice, then just sensing, trying to find who I am, I will fall into the groove of the other person's projection. I will become the villain they see me to be. And in doing so, must reenact the trauma that they are using to define the new identity. And their ego doesn't want to give that up unless there's clarity and certainty of something better. Something better and more solid. Better and more solid. I don't know about that. Could be good, but I can't trust it. I'd rather suffer in this known stable pattern that I have control of than risk and lose my bearing, lose and fall into the unknown chaos again. The unknown chaos of pain, helplessness, and the loss of identity. The loss of the pattern that I rely on to navigate my reality. So this is the answer to the question, is there something more certain? This is where an intervention, for example, can be effective if one, this is understood, and two, there is competency and love at a high level to map out with the ego in crisis in PTSD, to map out with the ego, what do they want? What's the role that they would play if they had certainty that they could enter that role? That's the one thing. And two, can the circle provide that certainty? Can a circle provide that certainty? Now, one person can't do it usually. Very few people have the resources and energy to provide that level of certainty. Sometimes they can, particularly with things where the identity is financial. Sometimes one person can say, look, here's $1 million deposited, tax-free, covered in this account. It will be there for you. Now, that's yours. You've got control over that. Now let's work on how you could step into an identity with that resource that's going to be there for you. You don't have to wonder about this and this and this and this and this. And you've got support. That's going to be there for you as well. You've got someone to talk to. You're never going to be left alone in helpless despair again. Now, who do you want to be? Well, that starts to provide the level of certainty needed to make the transition from identifying with the worst moment to identifying with a dream, with something far more beautiful, that has stability, that has resilience, that has the safety of certainty around it, until confidence can be developed. And the person that will relive the nightmare over and over again, when there's uncertainty and fear of the unknown, will step into a role when they've got certainty. Certainty in the form of rank, certainty in the form of resources, certainty in the form of support, certainty in the form of clarity. Like, let's try this out for 2 or 3 days. If you don't like it, we'll go back to the PTSD identity. But if you do like it, and you are certain you like it because you've tried it, and I'm right here, we can go back to the PTSD identity anytime. It's an anchor. At the point when someone can believe with certainty that they can stabilize and embody the new superior identity, they will let go of the worst moments of their life and embrace the new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in a context in which they feel safer than they did before the traumatic incident, or that they felt after the traumatic incident. Because some people feel safe, then they're traumatized and they realize, oh my God, I never was safe. That could have happened at any point and I didn't know. I can't trust myself. I can't trust the world. I can't trust others. If I feel safe again, I can't trust that it's real. Because I thought the last safety was real. And look what a tumble I took. So if I trust that this is real, how is that not just as fragile as the last trust that I thought was real? And I was wrong about that, so why wouldn't I be wrong about this? That's the quest. That's the quest an individual and a circle of people must embark on if there is to be a successful venture out of the traumatic identity and into an identity based on post-traumatic growth.